Before we begin tonight's tale, a quick reminder. If you enjoy these journeys into the dark corners of history, please do consider subscribing. It lets us know you're out there, listening in the dark, and we do so enjoy the company. The Ozarks, in the year of our Lord 1857, were not a place of gentle forgiveness. The land itself was a hard master, all limestone knuckles and shadowed hollers, and it bred a hard people. Towns were mere suggestions, collections of rough-hewn cabins huddled against the ancient whispering woods. It was a place where progress was a rumor, and the old ways, the dark superstitions brought over from forgotten shores, still held sway. Into this world, on the sprawling, isolated estate of Zebulon Croft, came Silas. He was not a boy, not truly, though he was not yet a man. He was perhaps 17, but lean and gaunt in a way that made him seem ageless, as if he'd been carved from the same hard hickory as the fence posts. He had arrived a year prior, on foot, with no past he was willing to speak of, and a quietness that the other hands found unsettling. He didn't just work in the stables. He seemed to belong to them, moving through the aisles of hay and shadow with the same silent, fluid grace as the barn cats. Zebulon Croft was the closest thing this county had to an aristocrat, which is to say, he was a bully with good land and a string of fine horses. His pride, Obsidian, a stallion as black and volatile as a thunderhead, was the jewel of his life. Croft valued the horse far above any human, including his timid wife or the rough men he employed. Silas was given the stables. It was the lowest work, mucking out the stalls, hauling water, and polishing brass that would only tarnish again. But Silas was meticulous. His silence was not one of dullness, but of observation. He saw everything. He saw how Master Croft would sweet-talk a potential buyer, his voice dripping honey, and then turn and curse the stable hand, Barnaby, with a vitriol that soured the air. He saw how Croft's wife, Elspeth, would flinch when his heavy boots hit the porch. He saw how the other hands gave him, Silas, a wide berth, mistaking his stillness for stupidity. They called him Stable Stain, or Shadow Boy. He never reacted. His world was the smell of sweet feed, oiled leather, and the earthy warmth of the animals. He spoke more to the horses than to any person, not in full sentences, but in low, calming shushes and soft clicks of the tongue. The horses, even the flighty mares, responded to him. They would lower their heads for his touch and stand quiet under his grooming brush. All except Obsidian. The black stallion tolerated Silas, but there was a mutual, unspoken challenge. When Silas entered his stall, the great horse would stamp a hoof and snort, its black eye rolling to watch him. And Silas would simply stand, unmoving, until the animal's defiance settled. "That boy ain't right," Barnaby, a burly man with a drinker's nose, muttered to the farrier one afternoon. They were watching Silas from the forge, the heat a stark contrast to the cool shadows of the barn. "He watches. Don't never speak, just watches, like a spider in a dusty corner," the farrier grunted, hammering a glowing shoe. "Long as he keeps the muck out, I don't care if he's the devil himself." But Silas was not the devil. He was simply a vessel, hollowed out by a life that had taken far more than it had given. And a hollow vessel, as the folk in those hills knew, was a dangerous thing. It left too much room for other things to creep in. One evening, as twilight bled purple over the ridges, Master Croft stormed into the stable. He was half drunk and furious over a lost wager. "Boy!" he roared. Silas emerged from the tack room, a bridle in his hand. "You left the gate to the small paddock unlatched. The gray mare got out. Could have broke her leg." Silas's gaze was steady. "No, sir. I latched it. I checked the pin." Croft's face, already florid, deepened to a dangerous purple. He strode forward and backhanded Silas across the face. The force was enough to send the boy stumbling into a pile of straw, but he made no sound. Not a cry, not a grunt. He simply pushed himself back up, a thin line of redness beginning to mark his cheek. "Don't you gainsay me, you dumb animal," Croft spat. "You're less than the dirt on my boots. You're nothing. Just a piece of human refuse that wandered in from the damp." Silas met his gaze. His eyes were the color of the creek bed, flat and gray and holding depths. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice a low rasp, like dry leaves skittering over stone. Croft, momentarily baffled by the lack of fear, just grunted. "Clean it up, and you'll have no supper for this. Perhaps a hungry belly will sharpen your worthless wits." He stormed out, his boots striking the cobblestones. Silas remained perfectly still for a long moment. The other horses shifted in their stalls, sensing the shift in the air. He slowly, deliberately, picked up the bridle he had dropped. His hand was steady, but in the deepening gloom of the stable, a place of warmth and animal comfort, something new and cold had just been born. He didn't wipe his cheek. He let the sting settle, let it burn its way down into his bones, a quiet promise of a debt to be collected. Silas was not empty, as the other hands believed. He was, in fact, singularly full of one thing, a purpose. This purpose was the only reason he drew breath, the only reason he tolerated the freezing mornings and the blistering, fly-thick afternoons. Her name was Lydia. She was his younger sister, the only soul left in the world who shared his blood. They had been separated 5 years prior, back in Tennessee, when their parents succumbed to the lung fever. Silas, strong enough to work, was cast out. Lydia, small and frail, was taken in by the parish and indentured to a cruel seamstress in Nashville. Silas had been saving every coin, every single half-penny, for those 5 years. His life was a monument to singular monastic focus, the meager wages he earned from Master Croft, wages Croft often forgot to pay, were hidden, not in a mattress, not buried in the woods. They were hidden in the one place no one would ever look, inside the wall of obsidian stall, behind a loose stone that was itself hidden by a permanent water trough. He was saving to buy her indenture. The seamstress, a Mrs. Gable, was a woman of sharp business, and she had named a high price for the girl's freedom. Silas was close. He reckoned by winter he would have enough. He would walk to Nashville and he would free her. This was the engine that drove him. It was the prayer he said when he woke and the ledger he balanced in his mind as he fell asleep. It was why he bore Croft's heavy hand and the other men's scorn. Every insult was just another coin in the jar. Every ache in his back was another step closer to Lydia. His life was a pattern. Rise before the sun, draw water, check the horses. He would mix the feed, a precise combination of oats, cracked corn, and molasses, his hands moving with an efficiency that was almost mechanical. He portioned it out, his mind elsewhere, counting his savings. This particular day, 2 days after the incident with the unlatched gate, Silas was performing this ritual. The stable was quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of horses enjoying their breakfast. He ran his hand over the great oak bin that held the oats. The wood was old, smoothed by 1,000 scoops. He had a secret communication with his sister. Once every 6 months, a traveling tinker who owed Silas a favor, Silas had tended to his lame mule for free, would carry a message. Silas could read and write, a skill he guarded as jealously as his savings. He had received a letter from Lydia just last month. It was not a happy letter. Mrs. Gable was working her harder. Her cough was returning. She was becoming unwell. The letter was stained with something. Silas knew it was not water. The urgency had set in, a cold panic that knotted his stomach. He had to be faster. He had to get the money. That afternoon, he approached Master Croft. It was the first time he had ever done so. He found him on the porch, rocking in a chair, a glass of corn liquor in his hand. "Sir?" Silas said, his voice quiet but clear. Croft opened one eye, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, boy? Can't you see I'm occupied?" "My wages, sir," Silas said, keeping his eyes fixed on the porch floor. "You mentioned you were holding them for me." "From the past 6 months." Croft stared at him. Then he let out a short, barking laugh. "Your wages? Holding them? What in tarnation gave you that idea?" "You said it was safer, sir," Silas pressed, his heart beginning a low, heavy thud. "So I wouldn't lose them." Croft uncoiled from the chair. He was a big man, and he used his size as a weapon. He stood over Silas, the smell of sour liquor rolling off him. "Now, I recall something different," Croft said, tapping his temple. "I recall hiring a half-wit boy for room and board. I give you a dry place to sleep in the loft. I give you scraps from my table. and you have the gall to ask for money? A cold dread, far colder than the January wind, washed over Silas. But sir, the agreement, Croft sneered, is whatever I say it is. I recall you had a debt. For that saddle you ruined with improper oiling, and for the feed you've been wasting. Why, I reckon you owe me, boy. Silas finally looked up. His gray eyes met Croft's. There was no anger in them, no fear, just a profound, chilling emptiness. The world seemed to drop away, the sounds of the farm fading to a dull roar. I need that money, sir, he said. The words were flat. Need? Croft laughed again, a truly ugly sound. Needs are for men, boy, not for stable scum. Now get out of my sight. Go polish something. If I hear another word of this, wages, I'll have you whipped and thrown off my land. You'll be lucky if you keep your hide. Silas did not move. He just stood there, a statue carved of bone and disappointment. Did you hear me, boy? Get! Croft roared, his hand raising as if to strike. Silas turned, a slow, deliberate movement. He walked away from the porch, his back straight. He didn't run. He didn't stumble. He walked past the chicken coop, past the forge, and into the cool, shadowed refuge of his stable. He walked to the far stall, Obsidian's stall. The horse snorted, but Silas paid it no mind. He reached behind the trough, his fingers finding the familiar coldness of the loose stone. He pulled it free. The small, hollow space was empty. His savings, his coins, his sister's life, gone. Croft hadn't just withheld the future wages. He had known about the hiding place. He had taken everything. Silas did not make a sound. He did not weep. He did not strike the wall. He simply placed his hand against the cold, empty stone, and a tremor ran through him, a seismic shift that rearranged his entire being. The boy who had walked into the stable was gone. The thing that remained was something new, something ancient, and something truly, dreadfully cold. The debt was still there, but it was no longer his. For 3 days, Silas was a ghost. He performed his duties with the same precision, but the other hands, even the dull-witted Barnaby, felt it. The stable had become colder. It wasn't just the approaching autumn. It was a stillness that radiated from the boy. He's taken it hard, Barnaby whispered to the cook, Hetty, a round woman who sometimes slipped Silas an extra piece of bread. Taken what hard? Hetty said, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands. The master. He let it slip. He taxed the boy, took his savings, bragged about it over cards. Hetty stopped, her hands sinking into the dough. Zebulon Croft, she whispered. We'll have a hot place waiting for him. That boy was saving for his sister. He told me, his only kin. Well, he's taken it hard, Barnaby repeated, shaking his head. He ain't spoken a word. Just stares right through you. On the third night, Silas left his cot in the hayloft. The moon was a sliver, offering no comfort. He walked out of the stable, not towards the main house, but towards the woods, towards the deep, dark ridges that rose behind the Croft estate. Everyone knew the stories. They knew not to go into the woods at night, not just for the wolves or the bears. The Ozarks held older things the locals respected with a fearful silence. Silas walked for over an hour, his bare feet unerring on the dark path. He knew these woods as well as he knew the stable. He was heading for a specific place, the Crossroads Holler. It was a place where two small, forgotten creeks met and crossed, a place rumored to hold power. He was going to see the one person Master Croft himself feared, though he would never admit it. He found her cabin nestled in the darkest part of the holler, a small, leaning shack that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Smoke, smelling of strange herbs and pine, curled from the chimney. This was the home of Ilara, the hill woman. She was a midwife, a healer, and some whispered, a conjure woman. He didn't knock. He simply stood outside the door until it creaked open. Ilara was ancient, her face a map of the very ridges she lived on. Her eyes, however, were sharp and bright, the color of a winter sky. She looked at Silas, her gaze taking in his ragged clothes, his bare feet, and the terrible, cold calm in his eyes. "You lost, boy?" she asked, her voice like grinding stones. "No, ma'am," Silas said. "I'm here for a remedy. I got remedies for coughs and fevers. I got poultices for sores. You don't look sick. It's a remedy for a pest," Silas said, his voice flat. A man who has a fine house and fine horses, and who takes what ain't his." Ilara's eyes narrowed. She studied him for a long moment. Zebulon Croft. It was not a question. "He took everything," Silas said, the first crack in his iron control. "And you come to me for what? Justice?" She cackled, a dry, rasping sound. "There's no justice in these hills, boy. Just power. What he has and what you don't." "I want to unmake him," Silas said, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "I don't want to harm his person. I want to take his pride. I want his horses to fear him. I want his house to feel empty. I want him to look at his fortune and see only rot." The old woman was silent. The crickets in the holler seemed to hold their breath. She looked at him with a new, strange respect. This was not a boy asking for a simple revenge. This was not a request for a quick, hot-blooded act. This was a request for a slow, cold unraveling. "What you're asking for, it ain't simple," she said, opening the door wider. "It ain't clean. It takes a piece of you. I have nothing left to take," Silas said, stepping over the threshold into the dark, herb-scented cabin. "That's where you're wrong, boy," Ilara said, her eyes glinting in the single candlelight. "It always finds something more." She motioned for him to sit. On her table, among dried bundles of herbs and strange stones, was an old, leather-bound book. It looked less like a book and more like a slab of dried, cured earth. "Croft's sin is greed," she murmured, her fingers tracing the cover. "A common, ugly sin. But his pride is in his beasts, in the black stallion. That's where his soul is." "I know," Silas said. "Then that," she said, her eyes locking with his, "is where we'll set the hook." She explained what was needed. It wasn't fire and brimstone. It was earthy. It required items of sympathy, a piece of the man, a piece of his pride, and a piece of the one who was wronged. "You work in the stable," she said. "You have access. You'll bring me hair from the stallion, not cut but plucked. You'll bring me a nail from his shoe. You'll bring me a thread from his favorite coat. And you'll bring me a token of your own loss." "He took it all," Silas said. "No," Ilara said. "He left the emptiness. You'll bring me a handful of dust from the inside of that empty hole in the wall." Silas nodded, his mind clear. "And one last thing," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This kind of work, it needs a focus, a vessel, something to hold the intent. You'll make it." "Make what?" "A poppet," she said, her bright eyes unblinking. "A small man, made in his image. From the mud of the creek, from the straw of his stable, from the spite in your heart. You'll make it. And then you'll bring it all to me." Silas left the cabin as the first hint of gray light touched the sky. He felt full. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. He was no longer just a stable boy. He was a collector, and a debt was about to be paid. The next few days, Silas moved with a renewed, almost terrifying focus. He was no longer just cleaning, he was harvesting. He was an artist preparing his materials, and the Croft estate was his canvas. His first object was the easiest, the thread. Master Croft had a heavy wool riding coat, the color of dried mud, that he wore every morning to inspect the property. He would toss it carelessly over a fence rail while he berated the field hands. Silas, tasked with fetching water, stumbled, brushing against the coat. His fingers, nimble and quick, plucked a single long thread from the hem. He coiled it and tucked it into the lining of his boot. One part acquired. The second was the dust. This was a personal, painful task. He waited until the dead of night when the house and grounds were wrapped in profound silence. He slipped into Obsidian's stall. The horse, sensing him, huffed, but Silas placed a calming hand on its flank. He reached behind the trough, his fingers finding the familiar hollow. He didn't just grab the dust. He scraped his fingernails against the stone, gathering the very essence of his loss. the grit and the emptiness. He folded this into a small scrap of cloth, 2 parts. The third was the most dangerous, the items from the stallion. Obsidian was not a gentle creature. He was the equine reflection of Zebulon Croft, arrogant, powerful, and quick to anger. Only Silas and Croft himself could handle the horse. The next morning, while grooming the stallion, Silas worked with deliberate care. He spoke in low, murmuring tones, his hand firm on the curry comb. While working on the mane, he isolated a thick black hair. He paused, calming the horse, then gave a single, sharp pull. Obsidian reared, his eyes white, his shriek of anger echoing through the barn. He lashed out with his front hooves, striking the stall wall with a sound like a thunderclap. "Whoa, boy! Settle!" Barnaby yelled from the other end of the stable, but Silas was already there, his hand on the horse's neck, his voice a steady, low drone. "Easy, easy now, just a horsefly, just a fly." He didn't back away. He stood his ground, letting the massive, angry animal settle around him. His palm was stinging, but clutched within it was the long, black hair. He held it up to the light. It was perfect. The final piece was the nail. This required patience. He inspected Obsidian's hooves daily, waiting. A week later, he found it. A nail in the left front shoe had worked itself loose, its head protruding slightly. To anyone else, it was a minor issue. To Silas, it was a gift. He didn't pull it. That would be too obvious, and the farrier would notice. Instead, he took the horse for its daily exercise in the paddock. He walked it over the rockiest, hardest part of the ground, again and again, his gaze fixed on the shoe. He walked for nearly an hour, back and forth, until he heard the faint tink of metal on stone. He calmed the horse, tied it off, and then walked back, his eyes scanning the ground. It took him 20 minutes, kneeling in the mud, but he found it. A single bent, rusty horseshoe nail. That night, he didn't go to the loft. He stayed in the tack room, a single lantern casting long, grotesque shadows. He sat on the floor, the smell of leather oil and saddle soap thick in the air. He laid his materials out on a clean cloth, the thread from the master, the dust from his own stolen hope, the hair from the master's pride, the nail from its hoof. He was missing only the vessel. He took a handful of straw from the feed bin. He took a small tin of mud he had gathered from the creek at the crossroads. He began to work. His hands, usually so gentle on the horses, were now firm, binding. He mixed the mud and straw, adding his own saliva to bind it, a personal binding agent. He didn't sculpt a perfect man. He sculpted an idea. A rough, straw-stuffed, mud-caked figure, no bigger than his hand. It was featureless, yet it was undeniably Croft. It had the same arrogant posture, the same heavy set. He worked the thread from the coat into the figure's chest, a web over its symbolic heart. He wrapped the long black horsehair around its neck, like a noose or a prized scarf. He used the dust of his loss to blind its non-existent eyes. Finally, he took the rusty nail. He didn't drive it into the figure, not yet. He simply laid it across its belly. He sat back, looking at the small, grotesque effigy. It was an ugly, pitiful thing. But as he looked at it, he felt a strange, cold power settle in the room. The lantern flame flickered, though there was no draft. He wrapped the poppet and the nail in the cloth, secured it deep within his shirt, and slipped back out of the stable. The moon was full, flooding the Ozarks with a pale, spectral light. It was time to return to the holler. It was time to give the vengeance its name. The walk to Alara's cabin felt different this time. The woods were not a refuge. They were a conspirator. The hoot of an owl seemed to say, "We see," and the rustle of a possum in the leaves sounded like hurry. Silas moved with the certainty of a man who had already crossed a line and had no intention of looking back. He found Alara waiting on her porch, as if she knew the exact moment he would arrive. She held a small lit clay pipe, the smoke sweet and pungent. "You have them," she stated. Silas said nothing. He entered the cabin, unwrapped the cloth bundle on her table, and laid out his work. The mudman, the hair, the thread, the dust, and the nail. Alara picked up the poppet. She turned it over in her gnarled hands, her expression unreadable. She sniffed it. "You put yourself in it," she murmured. "Your spittle. Good. It binds you to the work. There's no turning back now." His fate is yours, and yours is his. What does that mean? Silas asked, his voice low. It means you'd better be sure, she said, fixing him with her bright eyes. This ain't a rock you're throwing, boy. It's a seed. It'll grow, and it'll bear a strange, bitter fruit. You might not like the taste of it. He took my sister's last chance, Silas said. I'll taste whatever grows. Alara nodded, a grim satisfaction on her face. So be it. She began the work. It was not a loud theatrical ritual. It was quiet, meticulous, and chilling. She took the poppet and laid it in a wooden bowl. She crushed dried herbs, nightshade, thistle, and a sprig of rue, and sprinkled them over the figure. This is the man, she chanted, her voice a low rhythmic hum. Zebulon Croft, master of the house, master of the horse. She took the black stallion hair and tied it tighter around the poppet's neck. This is his pride. This is his power. As this tightens, so shall his grip. She took the thread from his coat and wove it around the figure's limbs. This is his wealth. This is his comfort. As this tangles, so shall his mind. She took the dust from Silas's empty hiding place. This is the debt. This is the emptiness. What he stole he shall now become. Hollow, barren. She looked at Silas. And now the nail. This is the intent. This is the pain. You must do this part. You are the wronged. You are the hook. She handed Silas the rusty horseshoe nail. Where? He asked. Where does a man feel his pride the most? Where does he feel his ruin? She asked. Silas looked at the small, crude figure. He thought of Croft's roaring laugh, his smug face, his belief that he was a king. He placed the point of the nail against the poppet's chest, right where the heart would be. He took a smooth river stone from Alara's table, and with one sharp, precise tap, drove the nail through the figure's chest, pinning it to the bottom of the wooden bowl. A log in the fireplace snapped loudly, sending a shower of sparks. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the cabin door. Alara smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It is named, she whispered. The malice is set. She looked at Silas, her eyes serious. Now the vessel. You work in the stable. You know the feed. This poppet, this thing, it must be buried. It must be close to his pride, close to his wealth. It must feed on what he values. The stable, Silas said at once. The main feed bin, for the horses. He checks it every day. He runs the oats through his hands. He loves the smell of it. Perfect, Alara breathed. It must be buried beneath the feed. It will be a root. It will draw the goodness out of the grain. It will soak up his pride, and it will send back this. She gestured to the pinned, ugly figure in the bowl. Every time he touches that grain, every time a horse eats from it, they will be taking a little bit of this malice into themselves. It won't be a fast poison. It will be a slow souring, a rot from the inside out. She wrapped the bowl in the dark cloth. Go now, before the sun rises. Bury it deep. Bury it where no one will find it. And then, you wait. And you watch. Silas took the bundle. It felt strangely heavy, as if weighted with more than just mud and straw. And Silas, she called as he reached the door. He turned. When it starts, she said, don't you dare feel pity. Pity is a weakness this kind of work can't abide. It'll turn on you. Silas nodded, his face a mask of stone. He stepped out into the pre-dawn chill and walked back to the Croft estate, the named hungry malice held tight against his chest. The stable was dead quiet when Silas returned. The false dawn was an hour away, a time when the night creatures had quieted but the farm was not yet awake. It was the deepest point of the night's stillness. He carried the cloth-wrapped bowl to the center of the stable, to the great waist-high wooden bin that held the sweet oats for the horses. It was Master Croft's pride, this feed. He had it shipped from the east, a special blend that he claimed made his horses' coats shine. Silas stood before it, the bundle in his hands. The air was thick with the sweet, dusty smell of the grain. He laid the bundle on the floor and grabbed a shovel from the tack room. He didn't just dig into the oats. That would be too shallow, too easily found. He had to go beneath. He began to scoop the heavy oats out of the bin, piling them on the clean-swept stone floor. He worked silently, with an almost frantic energy, his muscles straining. It took the better part of an hour to empty one side of the massive bin until the rough wooden planks of the floor were exposed. His breath was coming in short, sharp clouds in the cold air. He took a pry bar and worked on one of the floor planks. The wood was old, the nails long rusted. It groaned in protest, a sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous barn. Silas froze, listening. From the loft, he heard Barnaby let out a loud snore, a reassuringly human sound. He applied more pressure. The wood splintered. He pulled the plank up, revealing the dark, damp earth beneath the stable. This was it. He unwrapped the poppet. It sat in the bowl, the rusty nail in its chest looking like a single accusatory finger. He took the bowl and set it gently into the shallow hole in the earth. It fit as if the ground had been waiting for it. He was burying Zebulon Croft in effigy beneath his own wealth. "This is for Lydia," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was the first time he had spoken her name in weeks. The word felt like a betrayal, a profane mixing of his love for her with the cold, dark act he was committing. But he said it again, firmer. "For Lydia." He took the plank and laid it back in place. It was splintered, but it held. He used the butt of the shovel to tap it down, making it level. Then, he began the work of moving the oats back. Scoop after scoop, he buried his vengeance. He buried the poppet, the nail, the malice. He buried it beneath tons of sweet golden grain. He buried it beneath the horse's feed. When he was finished, he smoothed the top of the oats with a rake, just as he always did. To any outside observer, nothing had changed. The bin was full. The floor was swept. The stable was in perfect order. But Silas could feel it. The air had changed. The feed, which had always smelled sweet, now had a faint, almost imperceptible undertone. A scent like damp earth, like rust, like something old and forgotten. He stood back, breathing heavily, his work complete. The first gray light of dawn was just beginning to touch the highest window of the loft. He had done it. He put the tools away, his hands steady. The cold, hard purpose had solidified into something else. Patience. He had planted the seed, as Alara called it. Now he just had to wait for it to grow. He went to the stable door and looked out at the Croft house, its windows still dark. A profound, chilling calm settled over him. He was no longer the victim. He was the shepherd of a quiet, creeping ruin. The first week, nothing changed. Master Croft remained his boisterous, cruel self. The horses ate their feed. Silas mucked the stalls. The wheel of the farm turned as it always had. Silas felt a flicker of doubt. Had it been a parlor trick? The imaginings of a grieving boy and a mad old woman? But Alara had said slow. The first sign was not with the horses, but with the barn cats. Hetty the cook always kept 2 cats in the stable to keep the mice down. They were sleek, well-fed creatures that Silas often petted. One morning he found them huddled by the stable door, refusing to come in. He set down their usual bowl of milk, but they wouldn't approach. They hissed, not at him, but at the stable itself. "What's got into you two?" he murmured. He followed their gaze. They were staring at the great feed bin, their backs arched, fur on end. Later that day, Master Croft came for his morning inspection. He was in a fine mood, having sold a mare for a good price. "Well, boy," he boomed, "at least you haven't ruined them today." He strode to the feed bin, a ritual he loved. He plunged his hands deep into the oats, letting them run through his fingers. Ah, the smell of good, honest grain. He breathed it in deeply. But this time his smile faltered. He sniffed his hands. "Something peculiar," he muttered. Hetty must have burned the bread again. The smell gets into everything. He seemed to shake it off, but Silas saw it. The first tiny flicker of uncertainty. The next day, the change began in the horses. It started, as it had to, with Obsidian. When Silas brought the stallion his morning feed, the horse, usually eager, shied away from the bucket. He dipped his nose in, snorted violently, and backed away, stamping his hoof. "Eat, you fool," Silas said, his voice flat. He dumped the oats into the trough. Obsidian wouldn't touch it. He stood in the far corner of his stall, his ears pinned back, his eyes rolling with a strange new anxiety. When Master Croft came to ride him, the stallion was a different animal. He was lathered in sweat before the saddle was even on. He shied at shadows, kicked at the stall walls, and snapped his teeth at Croft. "What in blue blazes have you done to my horse?" Croft roared at Silas. "Nothing, sir," Silas said, his gaze steady. "He just seems spooked." "Spooked? He's never spooked." It took both Croft and Barnaby to get the saddle on, and when Croft mounted him, Obsidian became a living whirlwind. He didn't just buck, he attacked the air, screaming a high, terrified sound. He threw Croft hard against the fence, a crack that echoed through the yard. Croft lay in the dirt. The wind knocked out of him, his face a mask of pale shock and fury. Obsidian, meanwhile, galloped to the far end of the paddock, where he stood, trembling, his black coat dark with sweat. "He's gone, mad," Barnaby whispered, helping his master up. Croft's arm was hurt. He cradled it to his chest, his eyes fixed on his prized stallion. The horse was not just angry. It was terrified. "It's the feed," Croft said, his voice a low growl. "It must be. What did you put in it, boy?" "The same as always, sir," Silas said. "Oats, corn, molasses." Croft stormed into the stable, Silas at his heels. He went to the feed bin and grabbed a handful. He smelled it. He tasted it. It tasted fine. Just oats. But the smell, that faint, earthy, wrong smell, was stronger. "Something's off," Croft said. He threw the grain down in disgust. "Get new feed, from the Springfield miller. I don't care the cost. This is tainted." Silas nodded. "Yes, sir." But Silas knew. It wasn't the feed that was tainted. It was the bin. It was the earth beneath it. The malice was seeping up, a slow, invisible poison, rising from the poppet with the nail in its chest. It was turning the sweet grain into a vessel of fear. The seed was not just growing. It was taking root. The new feed arrived from Springfield. It was expensive, the bags clean, the oats bright and golden. Master Croft oversaw the changing of it himself. He had Silas and Barnaby empty the entire feed bin, scoop by scoop. Silas's heart pounded as they reached the bottom. Would they see the loose plank? "Faster, you lazy hounds!" Croft yelled. They shoveled the last of the tainted feed out. The plank was there, covered in oat dust. It looked like all the others. Croft, in his impatience, didn't even glance at it. "There!" he boomed. "Filth! Get it out of here! Burn it!" They hauled the old feed to the dumping ground and set it alight. The smoke was thick and had a strange, acrid smell. Silas watched it burn, a cold satisfaction in his heart. The poppet was safe, the earth undisturbed. "Now," Croft said, rubbing his hands, "fill the bin with the good grain." They filled the bin. The stable smelled sweet again. Croft went to Obsidian's stall with a bucket of the new feed himself. "Here, my beauty. None of that swill. The best. Only the best for you." Obsidian, who had not eaten in 2 days, was gaunt and trembling. He dipped his nose into the bucket, and for a moment he ate. Croft let out a sigh of relief. "See, I knew it. Bad feed. That worthless stable boy probably let it get wet." But the relief was short-lived. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the Ozarks, and the stable, usually a place of warmth, felt wrong. Silas was in the loft, asleep, when he heard the sounds. It wasn't the horses. It was Master Croft. He was in the stable, in the dark, with a lantern. Silas crept to the edge of the loft and looked down. Croft was at the feed bin. He was running his hands through the new, clean oats. But he kept listening. "Who's there?" Croft whispered, spinning around. There was no one, only Silas, watching from the shadows above. "Just the wind," Croft muttered to himself. But he looked spooked. He kept shaking his head as if to clear it. He grabbed a bucket, but as he scooped the feed, he flinched. "Ugh!" He dropped the bucket, oats scattering. He was staring at his hand. "A nail, a rusty nail, in the new feed." He held it up. Silas could see it from the loft. It was just a regular nail, probably from the bin itself, but Croft looked at it with pure terror. He looked guilty. How? He whispered. He looked around the stable, his eyes wide and fearful. He was no longer the king of his domain. He was a trespasser. He backed out of the stable, leaving the spilled feed on the floor. The next day the horses were worse. The new feed, resting on the plank above the malice, had taken on the same taint, but faster this time. It wasn't food, not a smell, not anymore. It was a feeling. The horses wouldn't eat, not a single one. They stood in their stalls, their heads hanging, their coats dull. They weren't spirited. They were saddened. They looked as if all the life had been drained from them. And the stable was filled with sounds. The other hands heard it, the whispers. It was just the wind in the rafters, they said. It was just the settling of the old wood. But it sounded like voices. It sounded like someone counting. 70, 80, 90. He'll pay. Hollow, hollow. Barnaby refused to go in after dark. It ain't right, Master Croft. The place is haunted. It's a haint in the barn. Nonsense, Croft roared, but his voice was thin, his bravado gone. He was carrying his injured arm in a sling, a permanent, painful reminder of Obsidian's fear. He began to blame Silas for everything. You're not cleaning right. You're letting the damp in. You're whistling. Stop that infernal whistling. It's upsetting the animals. Silas had not been whistling. Yes, sir, Silas said. He watched as Croft, the man of power, the bully, began to unravel. Croft was now the one who was silent and watchful. He was the one who flinched at shadows. He spent less and less time in the stable, the one place he had loved most. The malice was feeding well. It was no longer just in the bin. It was in the air. It was in the sound. And it was in Master Croft's head. Zebulon Croft's unraveling was not a sudden snap, but a slow, fraying process, like a good rope left out in the rain. His fortune was built on his horses, and his horses were now worthless. They weren't just off, they were empty. His prized stallion, Obsidian, did nothing but stand in the back of his stall, facing the wall, refusing food, refusing to be touched. His black coat became dull, his ribs began to show. He was a specter of his former self. Buyers who came to see Croft's stock took one look at the listless, spooked animals and left, muttering about bad lines or some sickness in the water. Croft's reputation, once the loudest in the county, was now a source of pity and suspicion. He became a creature of the night. The whispers in the stable, which Barnaby and the other hands fled, seemed to call to him. Silas, from his perch in the loft, would watch. Croft would enter the stable near midnight, a bottle in one hand, a lantern in the other. He would stand in the center aisle, his eyes wild. "Who are you?" he'd demand of the shadows. "Show yourself." The only reply would be the settling of the old barn, the creak of the beams. But to Croft, it was a response. "He's talking to the barn," Hetty whispered to Silas one morning, handing him a biscuit. Her eyes were full of pity, but not for Croft, for the boy. "He's lost his mind." "He's just troubled, ma'am," Silas said, his voice neutral. "You're a good boy, Silas," she said, patting his arm, to not hold a grudge. Silas just looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. He took the biscuit and went to the stable. His grudge was thriving. Croft's paranoia, watered by liquor and guilt, bloomed. He began to see patterns where there were none. He became obsessed with Silas. He saw the boy's silence not as a lack, but as a presence. "He's always watching," Croft complained to his wife, Elspeth. "He never blinks. He just stands there, polishing that leather. Polishing, the same spot, over and over. He's plotting." "Zebulon, dear," she'd say, her voice trembling. "He's just a boy. He's just quiet." "Quiet like a snake," Croft roared, making her jump. "He's the one who did this. He's a curse. He's a witch." The accusation hung in the air. In 1857, Ozarks, this was not a light word. It was a dangerous one. Croft started to follow Silas. He would hide behind the forge or in the corn crib, watching the boy work. Silas, who had spent his life being invisible, knew every time. He could feel the man's hot, panicked eyes on his back. He simply continued his work. He mucked the stalls. He polished the tack. He hauled the water. And every morning he would go to the bin, scoop the feed, and give it to the horses who would not eat. He would run his own hands through the grain, the malice-infused oats. He would feel the coldness in it. It didn't affect him. He had planted it, after all. He was its kin. One afternoon, Croft confronted him. He cornered Silas in the tack room, his face sweaty, his eyes bloodshot. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice a low, desperate rasp. "Sir?" Silas asked, not turning from the saddle he was oiling. "The horses. My mind. I hear them. Counting my. He couldn't say it. "I don't know what you mean, sir," Silas said. Croft grabbed him, spinning him around. He pushed Silas against the wall, his face inches from the boys. You did this. You came from the dark, from the mud, and you brought this filth with you." Silas did not flinch. He did not struggle. He just met the man's terrified gaze. "You took my wages, sir," Silas said. It was the first time he had mentioned it since that day. The words hit Croft like a physical blow. He staggered back, his hand over his heart. The money? That's what this is? For a few paltry coins?" "It was for my sister," Silas said, his voice a flat, dead thing. "It was her last hope. She is unwell. You took her, just as you took the money." Croft stared at him. The guilt, the one thing the malice had been feeding, finally rose up and choked him. He saw it all. The boy's face was no longer a boy's face. It was the face of a judge. It was the face of every sin he had ever committed. It was in the wall," Croft stammered. I was. He couldn't finish. He turned and fled the tack room, stumbling like a drunken man. He ran not to the house, but to the stables, to the one place he now feared most. Silas slowly, calmly turned back to the saddle and continued to polish the leather. The second act was beginning. Zebulon Croft was a man possessed. He ran to Obsidian's stall. The horse was standing there, a skeleton covered in black hide, its head hanging. "The wall," Croft muttered. He said, "The wall." He grabbed a pitchfork and began to attack the wall behind the water trough. "The money. It's still here. I just borrowed it." He tore at the stones, his hands bleeding. He found the loose one. He pulled it free. The hole was empty, just as Silas had found it. Croft let out a high, keening sound, like a wounded animal. "Empty," he whispered. "He's right. It's empty." He looked at the empty hole. He looked at his empty, dying horse. He looked at his hands, covered in his own red, and he thought of the whispers, hollow, barren, empty. His mind snapped. "The feed," he roared. "It's not the feed. It's in the feed." He ran from the stall to the great bin. He didn't grab a shovel. He plunged his arms in, up to the elbows, a madman digging for treasure. He began to throw the oats, scoop by scoop, with his bare hands. "Where is it? Where is it?" he grunted, the grain flying, covering the stable floor. "I know you're in here. Show yourself." Barnaby and the other hands gathered at the door, watching in terrified silence. "Master, he's gone," Barnaby whispered. Silas walked calmly from the tack room and stood at the edge of the scene. He watched the man who had stolen his hope, the man who had ruined his life, now digging in his own ruin. Croft was crying now, great, heaving sobs. It's not fair. It's mine." He was halfway down the bin, the oats up to his waist, when his fingers touched something. It wasn't wood. "Ah!" he screamed, pulling his hand back. He stared at his hand. There was nothing on it, but he had felt it. Something cold, something hard. He plunged his hands back in, digging. He hit the floor, the plank. "It's under," he breathed. He threw the last of the oats aside. He saw the splintered plank. He saw the fresh pry marks he had been too arrogant to notice before. With a scream of pure animal terror, he grabbed the edges of the plank and heaved. The wood splintered, the rusted nails squealing as they came free. And there it was, sitting in the dark, damp earth, the small wooden bowl. Croft was panting, his eyes fixed on it. He reached a trembling hand in and lifted it out. He brought it up into the dim light of the stable. He saw the poppet, the mud and straw man. He saw the thread from his own coat wrapped around its limbs. He saw the black hair from his stallion wrapped around its neck. He saw the dust from the empty hole, and he saw the nail, the rusty, bent horseshoe nail, driven straight through its heart. He held in his hands a perfect, miniature, grotesque mirror of his own soul and his own ruin. He looked from the poppet to the empty stall of his stallion, and then, his eyes, wide with a final devastating understanding, found Silas. Silas was standing by the door, his face in the shadow, unmoving. "You," Croft whispered. The word was full of a terrible, final knowledge. "You." He didn't say, "Witch." He didn't say, "Devil." He just said, "You." Silas said nothing. He just watched. Croft looked at the poppet one last time, and he did the one thing Silas had not anticipated. He laughed. It was not a laugh of mirth. It was a sound of a broken mind, a dry, rattling, terrible sound. He laughed until tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and the grime. "You," he gasped. "You won." He dropped the bowl. The poppet rolled onto the floor, the nail still firmly in its chest. Zebulon Croft turned, pushed past the stunned farmhands, and ran. He ran out of the stable. He ran past his house. He ran past the forge and the fields. He ran, hatless, coatless, his arm in its sling, and disappeared into the darkening woods of the Ozarks. He was never seen again. The silence that fell over the Croft estate in the following days was heavier and more profound than the whispers had ever been. Zebulon Croft was gone. He had vanished into the hills, and no one went looking for him. The Ozarks had a way of swallowing men who ran into them with a broken mind. The land would reclaim them. Elspeth Croft, his wife, showed a surprising, quiet strength. She did not weep. She packed 2 bags, sold the land and the house to a speculator from Springfield for a fraction of its worth, and took a carriage back east, to family. She didn't even look at the stables as she left. The farmhands, unpaid and now unemployed, drifted away. Barnaby was the last to go. "What'll you do, Silas?" he asked, his bag on his shoulder. Silas was in the stable, methodically cleaning. "I'll finish my work." "It's not your work anymore, boy. It's nobody's," Barnaby said, gesturing to the empty stalls. The sickness. It took him. He was referring to the horses. In the days after Croft's disappearance, the horses departed. One by one they had laid down in their stalls and simply stopped. There was no sign of distress. They just gave up. Their pride, the thing the malice had been feeding on, was gone with their master. Even Obsidian, the great black stallion, was found one morning, still, his head finally at rest. The stable was now just a great empty wooden tomb. "You're welcome to come with me," Barnaby offered. "Towns are growing. We can find work." "Thank you, Barnaby," Silas said, his voice soft. "But I have an errand in Tennessee." Barnaby looked at the boy. The gaunt, hollowed-out shadow boy was gone. Silas still looked lean, but he stood straighter. The coldness in his eyes was still there, but it was no longer the flat gray of a creek bed. It was the sharp, polished gray of a whetstone. "Be careful, Silas," Barnaby said, a strange, new respect in his voice. "The world, it ain't kind." "I know," Silas said. Barnaby left. Silas was alone. He was the master of the silent, empty estate. He walked from the stable to the main house. The speculators had left the furniture. He walked into Croft's study. He opened the man's desk, and there, in a small cash box, was money. Not his money, Croft's money. Enough to buy a good horse, enough to buy clean clothes, and more than enough to buy an indenture. He took only what he was owed. He counted it out, coin by coin, the exact amount that Croft had stolen from him. Not a penny more. He left the rest. He was not a thief. He was a collector. His last act was in the stable. He went to the center of the floor, to the empty bin. The poppet was still there, lying on the stone floor, caked in dirt and spilled oats. He picked it up. He looked at the crude figure, the nail still in its chest. It was just mud and straw. Harmless. Powerless. Or was it? He took the nail out. The poppet seemed to deflate, to become smaller. He walked to the forge, which was still warm. He heated the rusty nail until it glowed a dull, angry red, and then he plunged it into a bucket of water. He was breaking the sympathy. He was unnaming the malice. He then took the small, mud and straw man and tossed it into the back of the cold forge. It would crumble to dust. He had one last stop. He walked to the crossroads holler. It was a bright, cold autumn afternoon, the leaves a riot of red and gold. The world felt clean, scoured. Alara was on her porch, chopping roots. She didn't look up as he approached. "So," she said, her knife thudding into the wood. "It is done." "It is done," Silas confirmed. "He is gone. The horses are at rest. The woman is gone. The land is sold. A clean sweep. You were thorough." "It was not me," Silas said. "It was the malice." Alara stopped chopping. She looked up at him, her ancient eyes sharp. "Don't you ever believe that, boy. The malice was just a tool, like this knife. It didn't do the chopping. The hand that holds it, that's the one. You were thorough." Silas stood, absorbing this. He felt a weight settle on him that was heavier than the one Croft's cruelty had placed there. "You said, it takes a piece of you," he said. "Did it?" she asked. "I don't know," Silas said honestly. "I feel less and more." "That's the way of it," she said, nodding. "You took a hard path. You traded one part of your soul to save another." Silas reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small handful of coins. "I came to pay you for your help." Alara looked at the silver and cackled. "Pay me? Boy, I ain't no shopkeep. I don't take coin." "Then, what is your price?" "My price is the story," Alara said, her eyes gleaming. "My price is knowing. You paid it, Silas. You paid it when you brought me the poppet. You paid it when you drove the nail." She gestured to the coins. "You keep that. You'll need it. The road you're on, it's a long one." "To Tennessee," Silas said. "Yes, to your sister." Ilara's face softened, a rare, strange sight. "You go, boy. You go and you buy her freedom. You use that coldness in you to protect her. You've proven you're a good shepherd." Silas nodded. He put the coins back in his pocket. "One last thing," he said. The poppet, the work, was it real? Or did I just push a man who was already falling?" Alara smiled, a true secret-keeping smile. "The feed did sour, didn't it? The horses did sicken. The whispers did come. And he did find the poppet." She leaned forward. "Some folks say conjure is about power over others. They're fools. Conjure, malice. It ain't about making things happen. It's about nudging what's already there. Croft was a man rotted by his own greed and pride. You just gave the rot a name. You gave it a shape. You gave it a home." She pointed to his chest. "You held a mirror up to him, Silas. And he broke himself against what he saw. That is the strongest malice of all. Now go get your sister." Silas turned and walked away from the cabin, leaving the old woman and the old ways behind. He walked out of the holler and did not look back. Silas did not run from the Ozarks. He walked. He walked with the same steady, relentless pace that he had used to haul water in muck stalls. But now his legs were strong, and his purpose was clear. He used the money he had taken from Croft's desk. He bought a sturdy pair of boots, a new wool coat, and a mule. He did not buy a horse. He found he had no stomach for them anymore. The smell of a stable, once his refuge, now only reminded him of the cold, sour smell of the feed bin. He traveled light, carrying only a satchel with bread, dried beef, and the small bundle of coins. He was just another traveler on the hard roads of the frontier. But he was not the same boy who had stumbled into the Ozarks a year ago. The world looked different to him. He saw the way men postured, the way they used their voices and their sighs to get their way, and he saw it for what it was, a hollow, brittle performance. He saw the way women bartered and bent, and he saw the steel in their spines. He was quiet, as always, but his silence was no longer that of a victim. It was the silence of a man who knows with absolute certainty what he is capable of. It was a silence that other, louder men found unsettling. On the road, he was approached by two rough-looking men at a ferry crossing. They saw a young man alone, with a good mule. They saw an easy mark. "That's a fine mule, friend," the taller one said, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "A mite too fine for a boy like you." The Silas of 6 months ago would have frozen. He would have given them the mule. The Silas of now simply stopped and looked at him. He didn't look at the knife. He looked at the man's eyes. His gaze was flat, cold, and held no fear. It was the same gaze he had given Zebulon Croft. "It's fine enough," Silas said, his voice low. The man faltered. He had seen fear. He had seen anger. He had never seen this emptiness. It was like looking at a deep, cold well. Just saying," the man's partner muttered, already backing away. "Come on, Jed. Let's go." The tall man, Jed, couldn't break Silas's gaze. He felt cold. He felt for a moment like he was the one being measured and found wanting. "Right," Jed said, clearing his throat. He turned and walked away. Silas paid the ferryman and crossed the river. He had learned from Alara. He hadn't done anything. He had simply held up a mirror. And the men had seen their own malicious intent, and it had scared them more than any threat. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping under the stars, of hard roads and cold rivers. With every step, he felt the damp, cold chill of the Ozark holler leaving him, replaced by the hard, hot focus of his purpose. He was not going to Nashville as a savior. He was not a good man. He knew what he was. He was the malice. He was the unraveling. But this time he would be an unraveling for his sister. He would be the cold, sharp tool that cut her free. He arrived in Nashville in the late afternoon. It was a city, loud and bustling, full of brick buildings and noise. It was a different world. He sold the mule, his pockets now heavy with coin, and he walked to the address he knew by heart, Mrs. Gable's seamstress shop. He stood across the street watching the shop. It was a mean, narrow building, squeezed between a tannery and a tavern. He thought of his sister, her frail cough, trapped in that dark, narrow place. The coldness, the familiar, hard-edged purpose settled in his heart. He was not here to plead. He was not here to beg. He was here to collect. Mrs. Gable's shop smelled of old wool, dye, and stale air. The woman herself was a match for the shop, thin, gray, and sharp. Her eyes were like 2 small dark buttons. She looked up from her cutting table when the bell over the door chimed. She saw a young man, plainly dressed but clean, holding his hat in his hands. "We ain't hirin'," she snapped, her voice like her scissors. "And I don't give handouts." "I'm not here for work, ma'am," Silas said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the dusty air. "I'm here for Lydia, my sister." Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed. "Lydia? She's indisposed." "I know," Silas said. "I'm here to buy her indenture." At the word buy, the woman's posture changed. The sharpness became avarice. "Is that so? She's my best worker. Her contract, it's quite valuable. I wouldn't even know where to begin with a price." $300, Silas said. Mrs. Gable's jaw dropped. It was an astronomical sum, more than the indenture was worth, and they both knew it. "Well," she stammered, that is a generous offer, but the paperwork?" "I have the money," Silas said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small, heavy bag of coins. He did not set it on the counter. He held it. "And I have the paperwork." He produced a bill of sale, drawn up by a notary in the last town he'd passed through. All it needed was her signature. Mrs. Gable looked from the bag of coins to the paper. She was practically vibrating with greed. "Lydia!" she shrieked toward the back room. "Get out here! Your family is here." The door opened, and a small, thin girl, pale and coughing into a rag, emerged. She was small for her age, her eyes wide and fearful. She saw Silas, and her eyes got wider. "Silas?" she whispered. It was a ghost of a word. "Lydia," he said. His voice, for the first time, had warmth. Mrs. Gable was already at the desk, a pen in her hand. "The money," she said, her hand outstretched. Silas stepped between Mrs. Gable and his sister. He put a hand on Lydia's shoulder. He looked at the seamstress, and his face changed. The warmth was gone. The cold, flat Ozark shadow returned. He looked at Mrs. Gable with the same eyes that had unmade Zebulon Croft. "Count it," he said, placing the bag on the counter. "And sign the paper." Mrs. Gable, her hands trembling, began to count. But her eyes kept darting up, not to the money, but to Silas. She felt cold. She felt a sudden, irrational fear. This boy, he was wrong. He looked at her as if she were a bug. It's all here," she said, her voice small. She quickly signed the paper, her hand slipping on the last letter. "Lydia," Silas said, never taking his eyes off the woman. "Go get your things." I don't have anything," Lydia whispered. "Then we'll go," Silas said. He picked up the signed paper. He did not touch the money. He left it on the counter. He put his arm around his sister's frail shoulders and steered her toward the door. "Wait," Mrs. Gable cried, a note of panic in her voice. She had the money, but she felt as if she had been robbed. You can't just—" Silas stopped at the door. He turned, his face half in shadow. "You're a fortunate woman, Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You took the money. Master Croft, he didn't." He turned and walked out the door, his sister at his side. Mrs. Gable stood frozen, her hand on the pile of coins. The shop, which had always felt small, now felt empty. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid of the dark. Silas and Lydia walked away from the shop. When they were a block away, Lydia, weak and overwhelmed, stumbled. Silas caught her easily. You're real," she coughed, clinging to his new, clean coat. I thought you were gone." "I'm not gone," Silas said, his voice rough. He looked at her, truly looked at her. She was so thin. Her cough was wet and deep. He had been too late. No, he had not been. "We're going," he said. "We're going west, out of this damp." We can't," she whispered. "We have no money." "We have enough," Silas said. He had kept back a small portion, enough for passage, enough for a doctor. He got them a room at a clean inn. He had a doctor see her. The man was grave. Her lungs are in a bad way. She needs rest. She needs clean, dry air and good food. Silas nodded. He paid the doctor. For the next week, he was not a stable boy, not a haint. He was a nurse. He sat by Lydia's bed. He bought her broth. He read to her from a book of poems he bought. He talked to her. He told her about the Ozarks. But he told her a different story. He told her about the high, clean ridges. He told her about the smell of pine. He told her about the bright, cold stars. He did not tell her about the stable, or the feed, or the malice. He did not tell her about the nail. And as he spoke, Lydia's color began to return. Her cough lessened. She saw in her brother not a shadow, but a protector. A grim, silent, but utterly devoted protector. You're so strong now, Silas," she whispered one night, her hand in his. "I had to be," he said. When she was strong enough to travel, they left. They took a wagon train, not as pioneers, but as passengers. They were heading west, toward the dry plains, toward the rumor of a place called California. Silas sat on the back of the wagon, Lydia asleep with her head in his lap. He looked back east, toward the life he was leaving. He was changed. Elara was right. A piece of him was gone. The boy who wept for his stolen coins was gone. The boy who was afraid was gone. In his place was a man who understood the nature of malice. He understood that it was not just a dark art. It was a tool of justice, a mirror to be held up. He was the sinister stable boy. He had buried his vengeance, and from it his sister's new life had been given root. He was no hero. He was no villain. He was Silas, and he was at last free. As the wagon rolled west, he looked at the setting sun. He felt a cold, hard peace settle in his heart. He knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the earth, that no one would ever harm him, or his sister, ever again. He would be the mirror, and he would be the hook.